A billionaire CEO humiliated a single mother in front of his entire company. Then hours later, he found his terrified daughter asleep in that same woman's arms inside a silent library. She was the employee he fired, the woman he never bothered to understand. But when his little girl whispered, "I felt safe with her," everything inside him began to break. This is a powerful story about pride, motherhood, regret, and the unexpected people God sends to change our lives forever. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can reach 1,000 followers. Snow drifted across downtown Boston like ash from a dying fire, coating the sidewalks in pale gray slush, while the city hurried forward without mercy. Emily Carter stood in the narrow kitchen of her apartment, staring at the microwave clock blinking 6:42 a.m., feeling time tightening around her throat again. The apartment smelled faintly of instant coffee and laundry detergent. Pipes rattled behind the walls every winter morning, and the old radiator near the window hissed like it was struggling to stay alive. "Mom?" A small voice called weakly from the couch. Emily turned immediately. Lily Carter, 7 years old, sat curled beneath a faded yellow blanket with her knees tucked to her chest. She was tiny for her age, all delicate wrists and nervous brown eyes, with long chestnut hair tangled from sleep. Her skin had that soft paleness children sometimes carried after spending too much time in hospitals. There was a quiet fragility to her that made strangers instinctively lower their voices around her. Emily crossed the room quickly and crouched beside her daughter. At 28, Emily looked older than she should have. Not because she lacked beauty. She had kind hazel eyes, soft features, and dark auburn hair usually tied into a rushed bun, but because exhaustion had settled permanently into her face. The constant balancing act of grief, bills, motherhood, and survival had sharpened something inside her. She moved carefully, spoke carefully, lived carefully, like someone afraid life might collapse if she made one wrong step. "You okay, baby?" she asked softly. Lily nodded once, then shook her head. "My chest feels funny again." Emily's stomach tightened instantly. Not panic. Panic was useless. She trained herself out of panic 2 years ago, the night she sat beside a hospital bed, listening to a doctor explain congenital heart complications, in calm, professional language that somehow sounded worse than screaming. "Can you breathe?" Emily asked. "A little hard." Emily touched Lily's forehead gently, then reached for the inhaler beside the couch. Her hand stayed steady even while fear crawled up her spine. "That's it," she whispered. "Slow breaths for me." Outside, a siren wailed somewhere down the street. Lily inhaled shakily. Emily forced herself to smile. "You know what today is?" "Tuesday." "Correct. And what happens on Tuesdays?" "Chocolate milk at lunch." "There you go." Lily smiled faintly. That smile nearly broke Emily's heart every time. By 7:20 a.m., Emily was signing forms in the nurse's office at Lily's elementary school while checking the time every 30 seconds. Mrs. Patterson, the school nurse, was a heavy-set woman in her 60s, with silver curls and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She had the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent decades comforting frightened children. "She's stable," Mrs. Patterson said gently, "but I'd still keep an eye on her today." Emily exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "You look exhausted, sweetheart." Emily gave a tired laugh. "That obvious?" "Honey, I raised 3 boys. I can spot survival mode from across a parking lot." Emily glanced at Lily, who was coloring quietly at the corner table. "I can't miss another shift," Emily admitted quietly. "Brooks Capital already cut 2 people last month." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "You're doing your best." That sentence used to comfort Emily once. Now it only made her tired. At 8:18 a.m., Emily finally pushed through the revolving glass doors of Brooks Capital. The lobby gleamed with cold wealth. White marble floors, black steel columns, towering windows overlooking the harbor. Everything in the building reflected money and precision. Employees moved quickly, with coffee cups and expensive coats, barely acknowledging the cleaning staff weaving around them. Emily adjusted the strap of her worn tote bag and headed straight for Conference Room A, Her heart sank when she saw the doors already closed. She was late. 18 minutes. Inside the conference room, Daniel Brooks stood at the head of a 40-foot table beneath recessed golden lighting. At 39, Daniel had the kind of presence that made rooms quiet before he even spoke. Tall and sharply built, he wore dark tailored suits like armor. His face was angular and severe, framed by short dark hair touched faintly with gray near the temples. Light stubble shadowed his jaw, giving him a roughness that contrasted with the polished corporate image. People described him as intimidating before they described him as handsome. Years ago, before Brooks Capital became one of the largest investment firms in New England, Daniel had been known as brilliant. Now he was known as ruthless. The failed merger that morning had only sharpened the edge already living inside him.
"We lost $80 million because people stopped paying attention," he said coldly. "And I'm not interested in excuses."
Nobody moved. Executives stared at spreadsheets like prisoners waiting for sentencing. Daniel's voice stayed calm, which somehow made it worse.
"When standards slip, companies collapse. That's how weakness spreads."
Then the conference room door opened. Every head turned. Emily froze instantly. Daniel's eyes locked onto her. For one brief second, nobody spoke. Emily became painfully aware of everything at once. Her damp boots from the snow, the cleaning badge clipped to her sweater, the folder in her hand, the silence swallowing the room whole.
"I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I was told the supply reports needed to—" "You're late!"
His voice cut through the room like glass. Daniel stared at her with controlled fury. He didn't see a frightened mother. He saw interruption, disorder, another failure in a morning already filled with them. Emily swallowed. "Yes, sir."
"What department?"
"Maintenance support and administrative assistance." Daniel stepped toward her slowly.
"Do you think your time matters more than everyone else's in this room?"
"No, sir."
"Then explain why 30 executives had to stop because you couldn't arrive on time."
Emily opened her mouth. Lily flashed through her mind. The inhaler, her tiny shaking hands, Mrs. Patterson saying she was stable. Emily looked down briefly, and Daniel mistook hesitation for irresponsibility.
"There it is," he said sharply. "The pause before the excuse."
The room remained painfully silent. Marcus Reed, the company's CFO, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with tired blue eyes and thinning blonde hair. Unlike Daniel, Marcus still looked at employees like human beings instead of moving pieces.
"Daniel,"
Marcus began carefully.
"Maybe we should—"
"No!" Daniel never looked away from Emily.
"If people here can't meet basic expectations, they don't belong here."
Emily felt heat crawling into her face. Humiliation always arrived physically first. Then came numbness. Daniel folded his arms.
"You're done here."
The words landed harder than shouting would have. A few executives exchanged uneasy glances. Emily's fingers tightened around the folder she carried. She could explain. She could tell him about Lily, about hospitals and heart monitors and sleeping in plastic chairs beside ICU beds after her husband died. But suddenly, she felt too tired to defend herself to another person, already determined not to understand. So instead, she nodded once.
"I understand, sir."
Something flickered across Daniel's face then. Not guilt. Not yet. Just the faintest sensation that something about this moment had gone wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Emily turned quietly and walked toward the door while every executive in the room watched her leave. No anger, no tears. That somehow made it worse. The door closed softly behind her. Daniel stared at the empty doorway for a second too long. Then he straightened his tie and forced his voice cold again. "Now," he said. "Where were we?" By noon, Boston had turned colder. The snow from morning no longer looked soft or beautiful. It had become wet gray sludge, pushed against sidewalks by impatient traffic, while sharp wind whipped through downtown streets hard enough to sting exposed skin. Emily Carter pulled her coat tighter as she stepped out of Brooks Capital, carrying a cardboard box that held the small remains of her employment there. 2 framed photos of Lily, a cracked coffee mug, and a navy blue sweater she kept in the supply closet for cold mornings. Nobody stopped her on the way out. That hurt more than the firing itself. People avoided eye contact when someone lost a job. Like unemployment could spread through a building like smoke. Emily crossed the street slowly, her mind numb with calculations. Rent due in 12 days. Lily's medication refill next week. Electricity bill already late. She tried not to think too far ahead, because survival became impossible when viewed all at once. Her phone buzzed. Mrs. Patterson. Emily answered immediately. Is Lily okay? She's fine, the nurse reassured gently. She's eating crackers and arguing with another student about dinosaurs. Emily smiled faintly despite herself. That sounds like her. She asked if you'd still pick her up at 3. I will. After hanging up, Emily stood still for a moment outside the subway entrance, while freezing wind tugged loose strands of auburn hair across her face. She wanted to cry. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, somewhere nobody could see. Instead, she inhaled slowly and started walking toward the Boston Public Library. The library was warm compared to the street outside. Tall marble columns stretched toward painted ceilings, and the scent of old paper lingered in the air like something timeless. The silence inside wasn't empty. It felt protective. Emily found a seat near the back computer section and opened job listings with mechanical focus. Cleaning services, reception work, night shifts at nursing homes, anything with health insurance. Across the room, children's voices floated from the reading area downstairs. A librarian walked past carrying a stack of books nearly taller than herself. Her name tag read Mary Ann. She was a thin woman in her early 60s, with dark skin, silver braids pinned neatly behind her head, and tired, intelligent eyes. Years of working around children had softened her voice into something naturally calming. You all right, honey? Mary Ann asked quietly, noticing Emily staring blankly at the screen. Emily blinked. Sorry? You've been reading the same job posting for 10 minutes. Emily laughed weakly. That obvious? Mary Ann smiled gently. Libraries are full of people trying not to fall apart. I notice things. Before Emily could answer, a sudden sharp cry echoed from downstairs. Not normal childhood noise. Panic. Several people looked up immediately. Then came another sound, a little girl gasping for breath between sobs. Emily stood instinctively. Years of motherhood trained certain reactions into the body before the brain caught up. She hurried downstairs into the children's section. A little girl sat curled beneath a reading table, trembling violently. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her blonde hair was tangled around her face, and her small hands pressed hard against her ears, while tears streamed down her cheeks. Expensive clothes, Emily noticed automatically. A cream-colored wool coat, polished shoes, designer backpack dropped nearby. Wealth practically clung to the child, but fear erased all status. 2 librarians stood nearby, trying unsuccessfully to calm her. It's okay, sweetheart. Don't touch me! The girl cried, voice cracking. Emily slowed immediately. The child's breathing was too fast. Panic attack. The little girl looked up suddenly, wide blue eyes frantic and unfocused. Emily's chest tightened unexpectedly. Because for one split second, she saw Lily after her first hospital procedure. Same fear, same helpless shaking. Emily crouched several feet away, careful not to invade the girl's space. Hey, she said softly. The girl flinched. Emily kept her voice low and steady. Nobody's gonna touch you, okay? The child's breathing hitched again. What's your name? Emily asked gently. Silence. Then finally, Sophie? That's a pretty name. Sophie looked at her suspiciously through tears. Emily sat cross-legged on the carpet. I'm Emily. You work here? Nope. Then why are you talking to me? Emily smiled faintly. Because you look scared. Sophie pressed trembling fingers against her chest. I can't breathe right. Yes, you can, Emily said calmly. Your body's just going too fast right now. Happens sometimes when people get overwhelmed. How do you know? Because my daughter gets scared too. That seemed to matter. Sophie's shoulders loosened slightly. She does?
Mm-hmm. And you know what helps?
What? Breathing slower than your fear. Sophie frowned like she was trying to understand that. Emily demonstrated slowly. In for 4 seconds, out for 4. Sophie copied awkwardly at first, then again, and again. 10 minutes later, the trembling eased. Marianne quietly approached Emily afterward. "Thank God," she whispered. "She's been like this nearly 20 minutes. What happened?" She got separated from her father after the reading event, security searching the building. Sophie suddenly reached toward Emily's sleeve. Not grabbing, just touching lightly, like she needed confirmation someone was still there. Emily looked down at the tiny hand clutching her sweater. Something inside her cracked a little, because Lily did that too whenever hospitals frightened her. "You hungry?" Emily asked softly. Sophie nodded once. Half an hour later, they sat together in the library cafe, sharing a blueberry muffin and hot chocolate. Sophie had calmed enough to speak in full sentences now. "My dad gets mad when I disappear," she admitted quietly. Emily stirred her coffee. "That's because he loves you. He works all the time." Emily didn't answer immediately. Children always noticed absence more than effort. "What's your daughter's name?" Sophie asked. "Lily." "How old?" 7. "I'm 8, Sophie said proudly. "Well then, you're basically ancient." For the first time, Sophie smiled. A real smile. Small, but real. Nearly 2 hours passed. At some point, exhaustion finally caught up to Sophie. She curled beside Emily in one of the oversized reading chairs upstairs, while Emily quietly read Charlotte's Web aloud. The child eventually fell asleep against her shoulder. Emily kept reading anyway. Then suddenly, "Sophie!" A man's voice cut across the room, sharp with panic. Heavy footsteps approached fast. Daniel Brooks appeared at the end of the aisle, breathing hard enough to destroy every inch of his composed executive image from that morning. His coat hung half-buttoned, snow melting across his shoulders. His dark hair was disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly, and raw fear had stripped years off his face. For the first time all day, he looked human. Then he saw Emily, and froze. She looked up slowly from the chair, Sophie asleep against her chest. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt completely different now. Daniel stared at the woman he had publicly humiliated just hours earlier. But this wasn't the same woman from the conference room. This woman sat patiently holding a frightened child for nearly 2 hours without asking for anything in return. Sophie stirred sleepily at the sound of her father's voice. Then something happened Daniel hadn't seen in months. His daughter reached for Emily's hand before reaching for him. Daniel felt guilt hit him so suddenly it was almost physical. Emily noticed it immediately in his face, but she simply stood carefully, making sure Sophie stayed calm. "She's okay," Emily said softly. Daniel swallowed hard. But Emily gently handed Sophie back to him before he could finish. "No child should feel alone when they're scared," she said quietly. Then she picked up her coat and walked away before Daniel could stop her. He stood there holding his daughter while watching the woman he fired disappear between rows of books. And for the first time in years, Daniel Brooks felt ashamed of himself. Rain replaced the snow by Friday morning, washing Boston in cold silver light, while traffic hissed across soaked streets beneath a sky the color of worn steel. Daniel Brooks stood alone inside his office on the 34th floor of Brooks Capital, staring at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows he usually loved because they made him feel above everything. Today, the height only made him feel distant. His office was immaculate, in the way expensive places often were. Dark oak shelves, black leather furniture, abstract paintings worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Everything carefully designed, controlled, cold. Yet all Daniel could think about was the image of Emily Carter, sitting in that library chair with Sophie asleep against her shoulder. His daughter had smiled, not politely, not out of obligation, a real smile, the kind Daniel realized he hadn't seen in months. Behind him, someone knocked lightly. "Come in." Marcus Reed stepped inside, holding a tablet under one arm and coffee in the other hand. The older man looked tired as usual, his loosened tie hanging unevenly against a wrinkled blue shirt. Marcus had spent 25 years in corporate finance, long enough to become immune to power and unimpressed by wealthy men trying to intimidate him.
"You missed the investor call,"
Marcus said. Daniel barely reacted.
"Reschedule it."
Marcus raised an eyebrow.
"You okay?"
Daniel turned slowly toward him.
"Find me everything on Emily Carter."
Marcus blinked once.
"The woman you fired?" "Yes." "That narrows it down to about 300 employees this year."
Daniel's jaw tightened slightly.
"The woman from the library."
Something shifted in Marcus's expression then. Recognition.
"Oh,"
he said quietly.
"That woman."
An hour later, Daniel sat at his desk, reading through Emily's personnel file while untouched coffee cooled beside him. The facts looked painfully small typed on white paper. Emily Carter, age 28, former nursing student at Boston Medical College. Withdrawn during final clinical year. Reason, family medical hardship. Widowed, 1 child. Employment history scattered across waitressing, overnight cleaning, retail, elderly care assistance. No disciplinary issues, no complaints, no attendance abuse. Daniel leaned back slowly. There was a photo clipped inside the HR folder from her original hiring paperwork. Emily looked younger there, healthier somehow. Her auburn hair fell loose around her shoulders, and her smile carried a softness life had since worn down. Another page caught his attention. Emergency contact. Lily Carter. Medical note attached. Employee occasionally requires schedule flexibility due to child cardiac monitoring appointments. Daniel went still. A strange heaviness settled in his chest, because suddenly, that morning replayed differently in his mind. Not an irresponsible employee interrupting a meeting. A mother terrified for her sick child. And he had fired her in front of 30 people. Marcus sat across from him quietly.
"You didn't know?"
Daniel laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it.
"That's supposed to make it better?"
"No," Marcus admitted.
"But guilt usually arrives after information."
Daniel stared down at the file again.
"She never said anything."
Marcus folded his arms.
"Some people would rather drown than beg for understanding."
That sentence lingered uncomfortably. By Saturday afternoon, Daniel found himself standing outside a small apartment building in East Boston, holding an umbrella against freezing rain. The building looked exhausted. Peeling paint, rusted railings, buzzers with cracked labels. This was where Emily lived. The realization unsettled him more than he expected, because people like Daniel rarely saw the actual lives of people who worked beneath them. They saw uniforms, schedules, payroll numbers, not homes, not survival. He buzzed apartment 3B. Static crackled. Then Emily's voice came through carefully guarded. "Hello?"
"It's Danu Brooks."
Silence. Long silence. Finally, "What do you want?"
"I need to talk to you."
Another pause. Then the door buzzed open. Emily stood waiting outside her apartment, wearing an oversized gray sweater and jeans, her damp hair tied loosely back. Without the company uniform and fluorescent office lighting, she looked smaller somehow, more fragile. But her eyes still carried quiet strength. Behind her, Daniel caught sight of a tiny apartment filled with second-hand furniture and children's drawings taped carefully to the walls. A little girl sat at the kitchen table coloring. Lily. She looked up curiously. Unlike Sophie's polished appearance, Lily looked like childhood assembled from practicality. Patched leggings, oversized socks, messy brown hair tied unevenly. But her eyes were bright and observant. Daniel suddenly felt intrusive standing there. Emily crossed her arms.
"You came all the way here to what? Apologize?"
"Yes." She nodded once.
"Okay."
Daniel blinked slightly.
"Okay?
You apologized."
"That's all?"
Emily looked tired more than angry. "What else is there?" Daniel struggled unexpectedly for words. He was good at negotiations, acquisitions, crisis management, but not this.
"I handled everything wrong," he admitted finally. "You deserved better."
Emily studied him carefully. "You know what the strange part is?"
she asked quietly. What?
You're probably the first person who's apologized to me in years. The honesty in her voice hit harder than accusation would have. Inside the apartment, Lily suddenly coughed sharply. Emily turned instantly. Every part of her attention shifted toward her daughter within seconds. Daniel noticed that immediately. The reflexive motherhood, the constant vigilance. Emily walked over and handed Lily a glass of water. Slow sip, sweetheart. Lily obeyed quietly. Daniel watched them together with something unfamiliar tightening inside him. Not pity, respect.
Your daughter's beautiful,
he said softly. Emily smiled faintly without looking up. She's stubborn, too. Mom, Lily whispered, eyeing Daniel carefully. Is that the man from your work? Emily hesitated. Children always sensed tension faster than adults. Yes. Lily considered him with unsettling seriousness for a 7-year-old. Did he make you cry? Daniel froze. Emily looked embarrassed.
Lily, it's okay,
Daniel interrupted quietly. Lily lowered her coloring pencil slowly. Mom cries in the bathroom sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep. The room went painfully silent. Emily shut her eyes briefly. Daniel felt shame crawl through him in waves, not because of the child's accusation, because she wasn't wrong. Finally, Daniel spoke carefully.
Your mom is very strong.
Lily frowned slightly. Strong people still get sad. Daniel had no answer for that. A few minutes later, Emily stepped into the hallway with him, while Lily returned to coloring inside. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and handed her a business card.
I want you to come back, he said. Not maintenance, community relations, better salary, full benefits.
Emily looked at the card but didn't take it. Why?
Because you're good with people. Because Sophie trusts you. Because I made a mistake.
Emily's eyes softened briefly before hardening again. What I need, she said quietly, is not a man feeling guilty. Daniel's chest tightened.
I'm trying to make this right.
No, Emily replied gently. You're trying to survive the feeling of being wrong. That landed harder than anger. Rain hammered softly against the hallway window. Daniel realized then that Emily Carter had suffered long enough to recognize the difference between kindness and guilt immediately. And maybe that was what frightened him most. The next Saturday morning, Sophie attended a children's art class in Cambridge for the first time in months. Daniel sat near the back wall, watching nervously, while children painted messy watercolor animals across long tables. Then Sophie suddenly lit up. Lily! Daniel looked up sharply. Lily stood near the doorway beside Emily, holding a tiny paint set against her chest. The two girls ran toward each other instantly. No hesitation, no class differences, no awkwardness. Just children recognizing comfort. Daniel watched Sophie laugh freely, while Lily showed her how to mix paint colors. And for the first time since his divorce, his daughter looked genuinely happy. He glanced toward Emily across the room. Two completely different worlds. Yet somehow their daughters had crossed the distance effortlessly. Rain hammered against the hospital windows, hard enough to blur the Boston skyline into streaks of silver and black, while fluorescent lights washed everything inside St. Mary's Pediatric Cardiology Unit in exhausted pale white. Emily Carter sat beside Lily's hospital bed, with both hands wrapped tightly around a paper coffee cup that had gone cold nearly an hour ago. She hadn't moved much since midnight. Lily slept quietly beneath thin blue blankets, small chest rising and falling beneath the steady rhythm of the heart monitor beside her. Wires disappeared beneath the neckline of her hospital gown, and an IV line rested against her fragile wrist secured by cartoon bandages decorated with smiling clouds. Emily hated hospital rooms. Not because of the smell, not because of the machines, because hospitals stole certainty from people one careful sentence at a time. Dr. Nathan Keller stood near the doorway, reviewing charts under dim hallway light. He was a lean man in his mid-40s, with tired green eyes and dark hair beginning to gray at the edges. Years in pediatric cardiology had carved permanent gentleness into his voice. Unlike many specialists, he spoke to parents like human beings instead of problems waiting to be solved.
"The irregular rhythm stabilized," he said quietly. "That's the good news."
Emily looked up immediately.
"And the bad?"
Nathan hesitated slightly.
"We need more testing."
Fear slid cold and sharp through her stomach. Emily nodded anyway, because mothers learned quickly that collapsing helped nobody.
"When?" "Morning."
Nathan studied her carefully.
"You should rest."
Emily almost laughed. Rest. Such a ridiculous word for people carrying too much fear. "She was fine yesterday," Emily whispered, staring at Lily. "She painted for 2 hours. She laughed all afternoon."
"Children are resilient,"
Nathan said gently.
"Sometimes their bodies hide stress better than adults do."
After he left, Emily sat alone, listening to the machines breathe around her daughter. She looked exhausted, now in a way Daniel Brooks had never seen before. Not physically, soul deep. The kind of exhaustion that came from years of pretending you weren't terrified. At 2:13 a.m., there was a quiet knock at the partially open hospital door. Emily looked up sharply. Daniel stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking deeply out of place inside the pediatric ward. He wore no suit tonight, just a dark wool coat over a plain charcoal sweater, rainwater still clinging to his shoulders. Without the sharp corporate armor, he looked older somehow, more tired. The hard edges of his face softened by worry. Emily blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?"
"Sophie told me Lily was sick."
Emily glanced down immediately.
"Sophie shouldn't worry about this. She cares about her."
Daniel stepped inside carefully, like he understood hospital rooms were sacred places for frightened people. He placed 1 coffee beside her quietly.
"I called Marcus," he said. "I can have the best specialists in Boston here by morning."
Emily shut her eyes briefly. There it was again. Money trying to protect people from helplessness. "Please don't," she said softly. Daniel frowned slightly.
"Emily."
"Don't solve this with money." The words weren't angry. That somehow made them hurt more. Daniel looked toward Lily sleeping beneath wires and monitors.
"You think I'm trying to buy forgiveness?"
"Aren't you?" He didn't answer immediately, because maybe part of him was. Rain rattled harder against the windows. Finally, Daniel sat in the chair across from her.
"When I was 9, he said quietly, "my mother worked double shifts at a diner outside Hartford."
Emily looked up slightly, surprised. Daniel rarely sounded vulnerable.
"She raised me alone," he continued. "Tiny apartment, leaking ceiling, heat that barely worked in winter."
A faint, humorless smile touched his mouth.
"I used to sleep wearing my coat some nights."
Emily listened silently.
"I watched men talk down to her every day," Daniel said. "Customers, managers, landlords, everybody." His jaw tightened slightly. "I decided very young I would never live powerless again."
The room fell quiet except for the machines. "So you built walls," Emily said softly. Daniel looked at her.
"I built success," he corrected.
Emily's tired eyes held his steadily. "Same thing sometimes." That landed deeper than he expected. Across the room, Lily shifted weakly in her sleep. Emily stood instantly to adjust her blanket. Brushing soft hair from her daughter's forehead with trembling fingers she tried desperately to steady. Daniel watched the movement carefully. That was love, he realized. Not grand gestures, not money. Just staying awake beside someone because they were scared.
"I don't know how you do this alone,"
he admitted quietly. Emily kept her eyes on Lily. "You do when you don't have another option." Something inside Daniel cracked slightly at that answer. Because for years, he'd surrounded himself with people who solved problems using money, contracts, schedules. Emily survived things that couldn't be negotiated away. A vibration interrupted the silence. Daniel checked his phone. 7 missed emails. 3 board messages? He ignored all of them.
That alone would have shocked everyone at Brooks Capital. Hours later, near dawn, Daniel returned briefly to his penthouse apartment to shower and bring Sophie clothes for school. The apartment overlooked the harbor from 50 stories above the city, all glass walls and modern silence. Expensive art lined the hallways, but nothing there felt lived in anymore. Sophie sat curled on the living room couch, wearing oversized pajamas, hugging a stuffed rabbit, missing one button eye. Her blonde hair looked messy from sleep. "Is Lily okay?" she asked immediately. "We're hoping so." Sophie nodded quietly. Then she hesitated before speaking again. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Are you scared?" Daniel froze slightly. Children asked questions adults avoided. "A little," he admitted. Sophie looked down at the rabbit in her lap. "Me too." Daniel sat beside her slowly. That was when he noticed papers partially hidden beneath the couch cushion. Envelopes. Dozens of them. Different colors, different handwriting. "What are those?" he asked carefully. Sophie's face changed instantly. Fear. Embarrassment. "Nothing." Daniel picked one up gently. Written across the front in careful, uneven letters, "To Mom." His chest tightened. "Sophie?" She stared at the floor. "I write them when I miss her." Daniel opened another slowly. Inside, childish handwriting filled the page. "Today I got scared at school, but I didn't cry because Dad already looks sad enough." Another letter. "Dad works all the time now. I think maybe he forgot how to smile." Daniel stopped breathing for a second. There were dozens more. 2 years of loneliness folded into paper. "Why didn't you show me these?" he whispered. Sophie shrugged weakly. "I didn't want to make you sad." Daniel felt something break open inside his chest then. Not dramatically, quietly. The final letter trembled slightly in his hands as he read. "I don't need Dad to be the strongest person in the world. I just want him there when I'm scared." Daniel lowered the paper slowly, and for the first time in years, tears finally reached him. Real tears. The kind no boardroom could stop. Sophie looked startled when she saw him crying. Daniel pulled her into his arms immediately, holding her tighter than he had in months. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely against her hair. "God, Sophie, I'm so sorry." Back at the hospital later that morning, Emily sat beside Lily, watching pale sunlight slowly creep across the floor. Daniel entered quietly, carrying breakfast neither of them would probably eat. He looked different somehow. Not weaker, just honest. Emily studied him carefully for a moment. Then she said softly, "Maybe you didn't lose your heart." Daniel looked at her. "Maybe," Emily continued quietly, "you just forgot how to use it." And for once in his life, Daniel Brooks had no defense against the truth. By April, Boston finally remembered how to breathe again. The snow had disappeared from sidewalks weeks ago, replaced by rain-soaked flower beds and trees slowly blooming along Commonwealth Avenue. Warm sunlight spilled across the city in soft gold patches, and for the first time in months, people walked without their shoulders hunched against the cold. Emily Carter stood outside the newly renovated community center on Beacon Hill, holding a clipboard against her chest, while workers carried boxes through the front doors behind her. The building wasn't large, but it mattered. A white sign near the entrance read, "The Harbor House Children's Support Center," founded for families facing medical hardship. Emily still stared at the sign sometimes like she didn't fully believe it existed. 3 months earlier, she'd been unemployed, terrified, sitting beside Lily's hospital bed, wondering how much longer she could keep surviving like that. Now she was the director of a nonprofit program she had built herself. Not because someone rescued her, because she refused to stop moving forward. "Mom!" Emily turned just in time for Lily to run straight into her arms. The little girl looked healthier now. Color had finally returned to her cheeks, and recent treatments had stabilized her heart condition enough for her energy to return. She still tired easily sometimes, but the fear surrounding every breath no longer hovered over Emily's life every second of the day. Lily grinned proudly. "Sophie says the cookies inside are fancy." Emily laughed softly. What makes a cookie fancy?
They have chocolate drizzle.
Well then, clearly we've become high society. Lily giggled. That sound still healed parts of Emily nobody else could reach. Behind Lily, Sophie Brooks walked down the sidewalk holding the leash of a golden retriever puppy, nearly too large for her to control properly. The dog bounded excitedly beside her, oversized paws slipping slightly across the pavement.
This is Winston,
Sophie announced dramatically. The puppy barked once, as if introducing himself personally. Daniel followed several steps behind them, carrying coffee trays in both hands. He looked different now, in ways most people inside Brooks Capital still hadn't adjusted to. He smiled more. Not often, but genuinely. The sharp tension that used to live permanently in his shoulders had eased slightly over the past few months. He still wore tailored clothes and still carried himself like a man used to leadership, but something softer existed beneath it now. Even the employees at Brooks Capital noticed. Daniel left the office before midnight these days. He stopped scheduling meetings during Sophie's school events. And every morning, without fail, he drove his daughter to school himself. Marcus Reed nearly fainted the first time Daniel canceled a shareholder dinner because Sophie had a piano recital. "You're becoming human," Marcus had muttered afterward. Daniel had surprised himself by laughing. Now he handed Emily one of the coffee cups carefully. "Vanilla latte. No sugar." Emily raised an eyebrow slightly. He remembered. "You drink the same thing every time." The answer came naturally. That still startled both of them sometimes. Neither had rushed whatever this connection between them was becoming. There had been no dramatic confessions, no sudden romance. Life had hurt both of them enough to distrust fast emotions. Instead, something quieter grew. Trust. The kind built slowly through hospital visits, school pickups, shared exhaustion, and difficult honesty. Inside the center, volunteers arranged bookshelves while children colored paper butterflies at folding tables. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. Daniel looked around carefully. "You really did this," he said quietly. Emily crossed her arms lightly. "We did." "No," Daniel corrected gently. "You did." That mattered to her more than he probably realized, because Daniel had invested in Harbor House, yes, but only after Emily made one thing painfully clear. "I don't want saving," she told him months earlier. "I want partnership." So he gave her exactly that. No ownership, no control, just support. And somehow that changed everything between them. Near the back wall, Sophie and Lily sat on the floor teaching Winston how to shake hands, though the puppy mostly just tackled them both enthusiastically. "Again!" Sophie laughed. Winston barked and nearly knocked Lily sideways. Daniel instinctively stepped forward. Emily touched his arm lightly. "She's okay." He stopped immediately. That was another thing he'd learned recently. Fear didn't always need controlling. Sometimes people simply needed trust. Around noon, reporters began arriving for the center's opening ceremony. Camera crews moved equipment across the lobby, while local sponsors gathered near the entrance. Emily hated public attention. Daniel noticed her growing nervousness instantly. "You okay?" "I'd rather fight another insurance company." "That bad?" "Worse." He smiled faintly. "You'll survive." She looked at him sideways. That sounds suspiciously like emotional support. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation." Before she could answer, a reporter approached Daniel near the podium. The woman introduced herself as Claire Donovan, a sharp-featured journalist in her 30s with intelligent dark eyes and a notebook already half filled with questions. Unlike many reporters covering wealthy executives, Claire watched people carefully before speaking. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "everyone's curious why Brooks Capital suddenly invested in children's community healthcare programs. That's a major shift from your company's usual priorities." Daniel glanced briefly toward Emily across the room, then back toward the reporters waiting. For years, he would have answered strategically, carefully, coldly. Today he didn't. "The person who changed my company," he said slowly, "wasn't a consultant or an investor." The room quieted. Daniel's voice remained calm. "It was a single mother I once fired because I judged her before understanding her." Emily froze near the refreshment table. Several cameras immediately turned toward her. Daniel continued anyway. She reminded me that success means nothing if you stop seeing people as human beings. Silence settled through the room afterward. Not awkward silence, the kind people fall into when truth arrives unexpectedly. Emily looked down briefly, overwhelmed in a way she couldn't explain. Not because of the attention, because Daniel meant every word.
Later that afternoon, after the reporters left and the center slowly emptied, the four of them walked through Boston Common beneath rows of blooming cherry trees. Warm wind carried flower petals across the grass, while the city glowed soft pink beneath the setting sun. Sophie and Lily ran ahead, chasing Winston between the trees, their laughter echoing across the park. Daniel and Emily walked several steps behind them in comfortable silence. "You know," Daniel said eventually, hands in his coat pockets, "a year ago I probably would have missed all this." Emily glanced at him. "What changed?" He looked toward the girls. "You did." Emily smiled faintly, but shook her head. "No, Sophie did." Daniel considered that quietly. Maybe they both had. They stopped walking beneath a blooming tree, while sunlight filtered through pale pink petals overhead. For a long moment, neither spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, because some peace only existed in silence. Ahead of them, Lily grabbed Sophie's hand, while Winston barked wildly at pigeons near a fountain. And for the first time in many years, neither Emily nor Daniel felt afraid of the future anymore. Because sometimes, people entered your life not to save you, but to remind you who you were before the world taught you to stop feeling. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles the way we expect. Sometimes He sends people into our lives to soften hearts, heal hidden pain, and remind us what truly matters. If this story touched you, please share it. Leave a comment about where you're watching from, and subscribe for more emotional journeys. May God bless you, protect your family, and bring peace to your heart tonight.